Imagine it is like midnight. You're standing in your kitchen, totally bathed in the glow of the refrigerator light, just staring down a leftover slice of chocolate cake.
Yeah, a familiar scene for a lot of people, I think.
Right. And you weren't even hungry an hour ago, but suddenly the craving is just undeniable. And, you probably think you are the one making the decision to eat that cake.
Which is completely natural. I mean, we assume we're driving the bus.
Exactly. But the research we are unpacking today suggests something completely different. Like, there's a very real possibility that it isn't you who wants that midnight snack.
It might actually be a specific population of bacteria in your gut.
Yes.
Mm.
Literally waking up for their night shift, pulling your neurochemical strings, and demanding to be fed on their schedule. Okay, let's unpack this because it's mind-blowing.
It really is. It reframes the entire concept of free will, honestly, at least when it comes to our metabolism.
Yeah.
Because, we view our bodies as these singular top-down machines run by the brain.
Yeah, the brain is the boss.
Right. But the literature we are looking at today paints a picture of a massive, decentralized ecosystem. You are essentially a host to trillions of microscopic passengers, and, well, they have a significant say in your daily energy, your mood, and your overall metabolic health.
Welcome to our deep dive. We have an incredible stack of sources today covering cutting-edge microbiome research, circadian biology, and clinical nutrition.
It's a lot of ground to cover, but it's fascinating.
It totally is. And our mission today is to decode the hidden connections between your body's internal clocks, your stress levels, your gut ecosystem, and how you move.
Because it's all connected.
Exactly. So if you have ever felt like your metabolism is working against you despite doing everything correctly, we are going to explore the invisible biological mechanisms driving that.
And more importantly, we're going to look at how you can actually optimize these systems using personalized nutrition and some very specific, simple daily habits.
Yes. But to understand all of this, I feel like we have to start with the concept of timekeeping in the human body.
Oh, absolutely. Biological timekeeping is foundational. I mean, before we can even address metabolic dysfunction, we have to establish the baseline rhythm.
The master clock.
Right, the master clock. So in mammalian biology, there is a central oscillator located deep in the brain in this tiny, tiny region called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, or the SCN.
The SCN. Got it.
Yeah. And this master clock is basically the conductor of your entire biological orchestra.
And the sources outline how this master clock is primarily calibrated by light, right? Like when morning sunlight hits your retinas, it sends a specialized electrical signal straight to the SCN.
Exactly. It's a direct pathway.
And that signal tells the brain to halt the production of sleep hormones and initiate the release of waking hormones like cortisol and serotonin.
Right. It wakes the system up. And then the SCN sends out secondary signals to synchronize the peripheral clocks in literally all your other organs, your liver, your muscle tissue, and crucially, your gastrointestinal tract.
And the gastrointestinal tract is where this mechanism becomes truly fascinating to me.
Oh, for sure. For a long time, the assumption was just that the gut microbiome, the trillions of bacteria and fungi and viruses down there, that they were just passive participants, just along for the ride.
But we now know they're deeply entwined with your circadian rhythm.
Deeply entwined. They have their own rhythms that match ours.
Okay, but I actually found myself stuck on the mechanics of this while I was reading through the studies. Because the central clock in the brain relies on sunlight, obviously.
Right.
But the gut microbiome lives in a pitch-black environment. If these bacteria never see the sun, why do they care what time of day it is? Like, how are they relying on a different set of cues to understand what time it is?
It's such a good question. So they rely on two main environmental cues provided by you, the host.
Okay.
The first is the rhythm of your food intake. So the cycle of feeding and fasting. When you eat, you flood their environment with nutrients. When you fast, usually overnight, the environment changes drastically.
That makes sense. It's like their weather system changing.
Yeah, exactly. But the second cue is purely biochemical. Let's look at a specific bacterium highlighted in the research. Klebsiella aerogenes.
Klebsiella aerogenes.
Right. It's a commensal bacterium, meaning it naturally lives in your gut without causing any harm under normal conditions. And researchers discovered that Klebsiella aerogenes actually possesses receptors that are sensitive to human melatonin.
Wait, melatonin being the primary sleep hormone the brain secretes when the sun goes down.
Correct. As your brain releases melatonin into your bloodstream to prepare you for sleep, a portion of it actually enters the gastrointestinal system.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And Klebsiella aerogenes detects this hormone and responds to it in a dose-dependent manner. As melatonin levels rise, this specific bacterium increases its swarming behavior, like its physical motility.
That is wild. So this is a clear demonstration that these microbes have their own internal clocks that actively synchronize with our endocrine system.
Yes, they are chemically eavesdropping on our brain's sleep signals.
Chemical eavesdropping. I love that. And that chemical eavesdropping coordinates a massive shift change in the gut because the data shows that up to 17% of the operational taxonomic units, which is just the scientific term for distinct groups or species of bacteria.
Right, the OTUs?
Yeah, up to 17% of them actually oscillate in population size on a daily basis.
And those shifting populations serve distinct metabolic purposes. It's not random. So during your active daylight hours, a phylum of bacteria called firmicutes sees a massive surge in population.
Firmicutes. And they're the daytime crew.
Exactly. These bacteria are highly efficient energy harvesters. They help you extract maximum nutrition from the food you eat during the day.
Okay, so then, as you stop eating and go to sleep, the firmicutes die back, and the Bacteroidetes phylum takes over the night shift.
You got it. They act more like a cleanup crew, doing metabolic housekeeping while you fast overnight.
So this rhythm is absolutely required for homeostasis. Morning light sets the SCN, which keeps this microbial shift work running smoothly.
Right, the whole system hums along.
But if you introduce a lifestyle factor that disrupts this, like working a graveyard shift or consistently staying up until 2 a.m. staring at a bright screen and eating snacks, you trigger a cascade of issues.
A massive cascade. The clinical term for that disruption is social jet lag.
Social jet lag.
Yeah, and when you experience social jet lag, you send completely contradictory signals to your biology. The artificial light from your screen tricks your SCN into thinking it's daytime, which suppresses your melatonin.
Right.
But meanwhile, the sudden influx of late-night food forces the daytime Firmicutes bacteria to wake back up right when the night shift Bacteroidetes should be working.
So you essentially force two different biological systems into a collision.
A total crash.
And the research shows this specific desynchronization is a primary driver of metabolic syndrome. It leads directly to impaired glucose tolerance, insulin resistance, and the accumulation of visceral fat.
Because the gut bacteria become confused. And a confused microbiome just cannot manage your metabolism efficiently.
Okay, so if a predictable rhythm of light and food keeps the gut functioning, what happens when psychological stress hits the system? Because the sources talk about how stress throws that ecosystem entirely off balance.
Yeah, stress is a massive disruptor. To understand why, we have to look at the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the HPA axis.
The body's primary stress response system.
Exactly. When you perceive a threat, the hypothalamus in the brain signals the pituitary gland, which in turn signals the adrenal glands, which sit right on top of your kidneys, to flood your system with cortisol and adrenaline.
Fight or flight.
Right. And in an acute scenario, say sprinting away from a physical danger, that system is life-saving. The cortisol mobilizes glucose into your bloodstream for immediate energy, and it shuts down non-essential functions like digestion.
Because you don't need to digest lunch if you're running from a bear.
Exactly. And once the threat passes, cortisol levels drop, and the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest mode, takes over again.
But the problem arises when the threat isn't a bear. It's like a looming project deadline, or ongoing financial strain, or a difficult relationship.
Yes. The body doesn't really differentiate between physical danger and psychological pressure. So the HPA axis remains activated, leading to chronically elevated cortisol levels.
And the sources detail the devastating mechanical effect this has on the gut lining. Elevated cortisol triggers immune cells in the gut to release inflammatory signaling proteins, specifically one called tumor necrosis factor alpha, or TNF-alpha.
Right, and to understand the damage TNF-alpha causes, you have to picture the gut lining itself. It is incredibly delicate. It is only one single cell thick.
Just one cell.
Just one, and these cells are held together by proteins called tight junctions, which act like mortar between bricks. They allow microscopic nutrients to pass into the bloodstream while keeping bacteria and large food particles securely inside the digestive tract.
Okay.
Well, TNF-alpha acts like a solvent on that mortar. It actively breaks down the tight junctions, creating a condition known as intestinal permeability, or leaky gut.
Leaky gut. And once that barrier becomes permeable, fragments of bacteria and undigested food literally leak into the bloodstream.
Which is bad news.
Right, because the body's immune system recognizes these particles as foreign invaders and mounts a systemic inflammatory response.
And this systemic inflammation radically alters the environment of the gut, killing off the beneficial bacteria and allowing opportunistic, harmful strains to overgrow, which is a state of imbalance called dysbiosis.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because this is where we see the profound nature of the gut-brain axis.
Yes, the two-way street.
The communication doesn't just flow from the stressed brain down to the gut. It is a bidirectional highway, primarily facilitated by the vagus nerve, and the gut actually produces a vast majority of the body's neurotransmitters.
It's true. Things like serotonin, dopamine, and GABA, which heavily regulate mood and anxiety.
So when the gut is in a state of dysbiosis and inflammation, it sends distress signals right back up the vagus nerve to the brain. And there is a study in the research stack that perfectly illustrates this causality.
Oh, the transplant study.
Yes. Scientists took feces from a group of mice that were fed a high-fat diet. These mice had developed severe gut dysbiosis and insulin resistance.
Right.
And the researchers transplanted this microbiome into a group of completely germ-free mice. Mice raised in sterile environments with no bacteria of their own who were eating a normal, healthy diet.
And the results of that transplant really isolate the sheer power of the microbiome. Because the germ-free mice, despite eating a healthy diet, rapidly developed insulin resistance.
It's from the bacteria.
Yes. The transferred bacteria completely altered how their bodies process glucose.
Uh-huh.
But furthermore, these mice began exhibiting significant anxiety and depressive-like behaviors.
Like hiding in the dark corners of their enclosures and abandoning normal exploratory activities.
Exactly. The bacteria alone fundamentally altered their metabolic and psychological state.
That is terrifying.
It really is. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the metabolites produced by the dysbiotic microbiome cross the blood-brain barrier and literally change their neurochemistry.
Which creates a horrifying feedback loop for anyone dealing with chronic stress. Think about it. The psychological stress causes leaky gut and dysbiosis. The dysbiosis causes systemic inflammation, anxiety, and insulin resistance. And then the physical feeling of anxiety and the blood sugar swings make you feel more stressed, which triggers more cortisol, further degrading the gut lining.
It's a vicious cycle, and breaking that loop requires physical intervention. If chronic psychological stress is paralyzing the ecosystem, physical movement acts as a catalyst to jumpstart the healing process.
Okay, let's talk about movement then, because exercise is consistently referred to in the literature as a real polypill.
A polypill, yes, because of its systemic, multi-target effects on the entire body.
I was thinking about the mechanics of exercise here. Like if we view the gut as a complex ecosystem, kind of like a garden, exercise isn't just about burning off calories to balance a ledger.
Not at all.
The physical act of moving your body, contracting your muscles, increasing your heart rate, it actually changes the circulatory environment of the digestive tract. It's like tilling the soil and pulling the weeds, bringing oxygen and blood flow to the area so that the beneficial plants can thrive.
That's a great analogy. And the biochemical result of that tilling is an increase in the production of short-chain fatty acids, or SCFAs.
Right.
When you exercise, you promote the growth of specific bacterial strains that actually ferment dietary fiber into these fatty acids. And the most critical of these is butyrate.
Butyrate. And the sources emphasize that butyrate acts as the primary source of energy for the cells lining your colon.
Right.
Like while most of the body runs on glucose, your colon cells require butyrate to function optimally.
Exactly. And when those colon cells are well fed with butyrate, they can actually repair those tight junctions we discussed earlier.
The mortar between the bricks.
Yes. Butyrate effectively seals up the leaky gut, stops the leakage of bacterial toxins into the bloodstream, and lowers systemic inflammation.
That's incredible. And there's a clear dose-response relationship highlighted in the studies, too. Like, you do not need to train like an elite athlete to see these benefits.
Definitely not. Moving beyond just sedentary daily living, whether it's brisk walking, swimming, or cycling, that alone initiates this microbial shift.
But the sources do strongly emphasize the synergy of combining aerobic exercise with resistance training.
Yes, resistance training is key. Building and preserving lean muscle mass is critical because muscle tissue is a highly metabolically active sink for glucose.
So when you have more muscle, your body can clear glucose from the bloodstream more efficiently.
Right, which normalizes your insulin response and helps reduce visceral fat, which is that dangerous inflammatory fat stored around your internal organs.
Plus, exercise also provides an immediate countermeasure to the HPA axis stress loop we talked about.
Oh, absolutely. Physical exertion triggers the release of endorphins, acting as natural stress relievers. By physically burning off the physiological arousal caused by chronic stress, you allow the autonomic nervous system to shift back into a parasympathetic state.
Rest and digest.
Exactly. This lowers cortisol levels and naturally fosters deeper, more restorative sleep, which, going all the way back to the beginning, allows the SCN master clock to properly reset.
Okay, so movement provides the structural environment for a healthy gut. But movement alone isn't enough if you aren't providing the right fuel.
No, you can't out-exercise a bad diet.
Right, that old adage holds true. But the definition of a good diet has been completely upended by microbiome research. So what does this all mean? This is where we step into the realm of precision nutrition.
Yeah, precision nutrition is a game changer because for decades, dietary advice relied heavily on general guidelines and standardized glycemic index charts, right?
Yeah, assuming a specific food would affect everyone's blood sugar roughly the same way.
Exactly. But a landmark 2015 study by ZV and colleagues proved that assumption entirely false.
The methodology of this study is fascinating. The researchers took a cohort of 800 individuals, fitted them with continuous glucose monitors, and collected detailed stool samples to map their individual microbiomes.
Right. Highly detailed mapping.
And then they fed them strictly controlled, identical meals and monitored their blood sugar responses.
And the data was wild. It showed that interpersonal glycemic responses to the exact same food varied completely. I mean, a piece of whole grain bread might cause a massive, unhealthy spike in one person's blood sugar while causing virtually no reaction in another person.
Because the determining factor wasn't the carbohydrate content of the bread, it was the unique signature of the individual's gut microbiome.
Because your microbial composition is as unique as your fingerprint. So the way your body extracts energy and processes nutrients is entirely individual.
But this presents an apparent contradiction in the field of nutrition, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, on one hand, the ZV study proves there is no universal, perfect diet because of individual metabolic responses. Yet the sources still consistently recommend dietary frameworks like the Mediterranean or DASH diets to combat metabolic syndrome. If it's all personalized, why do these general frameworks still work?
Right. The resolution to that contradiction lies in the raw materials. Precision nutrition uses your specific microbiome profile to fine-tune exactly which foods prevent your specific blood sugar spikes.
Right, avoiding your personal trigger.
Exactly. However, regardless of your unique bacterial signature, almost all beneficial gut bacteria require the same foundational substrate to survive, and that is fermentable dietary fiber.
Okay, so diets like the Mediterranean framework aren't magic because of some specific ratio of macros. They work because they provide a massive diversity of plant fibers.
Precisely. You need a wide variety of fibers because different bacterial strains prefer different types of complex carbohydrates. When you consume a diverse range of prebiotics,
Which are the fibers that feed the bacteria?
right, when you eat those, you give your unique microbiome the raw materials it needs to produce those healing short-chain fatty acids like butyrate.
And alongside prebiotics, introducing probiotics, which are the live beneficial bacteria found in fermented foods like kimchi, kefir, and sauerkraut, that helps introduce transient microbes that support the existing ecosystem.
Yes, and the clinical science is now actually moving a step further into something called postbiotics.
Postbiotics, basically a shortcut, right?
Yeah, kind of. Instead of eating the fiber to feed the bacteria, hoping they produce butyrate, postbiotics are supplements containing the beneficial metabolic byproducts themselves.
So researchers are developing targeted ways to deliver SCFAs directly to the gut environment.
Exactly. It offers the new therapeutic avenue for managing metabolic syndrome without relying solely on restrictive dietary changes.
That is so cool. Okay, so the nutrition and the exercise provide the physical components for metabolic health.
They do.
But pulling all of these sources together reveals that trying to heal the gut purely through physical inputs will fail if the neurological environment remains toxic. True metabolic health demands a holistic integration of mind and body.
Absolutely. Because you could eat the most meticulously personalized high-fiber diet in the world. But if your brain is constantly perceiving your email inbox as a mortal threat,
The bear again.
right, the bear in your inbox, if you perceive that threat constantly, your HPA axis will continue to flood your system with cortisol. The resulting TNF-alpha release will keep the gut permeable, and the systemic inflammation will just persist.
Which is why the literature places such a heavy emphasis on psychological interventions like cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT alongside mindfulness practices.
They aren't just feel-good exercises. They are physical interventions for the nervous system.
Because CBT helps restructure the cognitive distortions that trigger the stress response.
Right. By training the brain to accurately assess threats, you physically reduce the activation of the sympathetic nervous system.
And as you lower that sympathetic activation, the vagus nerve is able to engage the parasympathetic state, acting like a brake on systemic inflammation. It's just a highly complex ecosystem.
It is. And to fully appreciate the depth of that ecosystem, we have to look at one final, incredible layer of the microbiome highlighted in the research, the gut virome.
The virome. Because we spend so much time focusing on bacteria, we often completely overlook the viral communities residing in the gut.
Right. And the virome is primarily composed of bacteriophages, which are viruses that specifically infect bacteria, not human cells.
So we mentioned earlier that the microbiome is like a complex ecosystem, like a garden. If we expand that metaphor to, say, a massive coral reef, the bacteria are the different species of coral and fish. The bacteriophages, the virome, act as the apex predators.
Exactly. They infect specific bacterial populations, keeping them in check and preventing any one strain from completely dominating the reef.
And they also transfer genetic material between bacteria, allowing the ecosystem to rapidly adapt to changes in your diet or environment.
It's incredible. The entire system, the human tissue, the bacteria, the fungi, and the viruses, it all must remain in delicate balance. Disrupting the virome can be just as detrimental as disrupting the bacterial populations.
Which really further highlights why holistic, lifestyle-based approaches are safer and more effective long-term than relying on single-target medications that might inadvertently crash the entire ecosystem.
100%.
So synthesizing this massive stack of research into actionable, everyday steps for you listening right now comes down to supporting the rhythm and the reef.
I like that, the rhythm and the reef.
Let's do a checklist. First, establish your circadian rhythm. Get outside in the morning and let natural sunlight hit your eyes to set the SCN master clock and initiate healthy serotonin production.
Second, protect your gut from social jet lag. Maintain consistent sleep and wake times, ideally getting 7 to 9 hours of rest, and avoid those late-night meals that force your daytime bacteria to work the night shift.
Third, manage the HPA axis. Implement active stress relief practices, whether that's CBT, deep breathing, or prioritizing community engagement. You have to signal to your nervous system that you are safe so the vagus nerve can stop the inflammatory cascade.
And finally, feed and till the soil. Consume a wide diversity of fibrous plants to provide the raw materials for butyrate production. Include fermented foods and engage in a mix of aerobic and resistance training to alter the circulatory environment of your digestive tract.
The biological mechanisms are deeply complex, but the interventions are remarkably accessible. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It is profoundly empowering to realize that while we don't have direct conscious control over the trillions of microbes inside us, we absolutely control the environment they live in through how we manage light, stress, movement, and food.
The environment shapes the ecosystem. Which kind of brings us back to our starting thought. Understanding these mechanisms completely reframes our daily impulses.
It really does.
When you feel a sudden drop in mood, or an uncharacteristic spike in anxiety, or, an intense craving for sugar late at night, it's really worth pausing.
Ask yourself if that feeling is actually originating in your brain, or if it is a distress signal traveling up the vagus nerve from a microbiome that has been thrown totally out of sync by modern life. Recognizing that distinction is the first step toward reclaiming control of your metabolic health. Thanks for taking the deep dive with us. Catch you next time.